Well, we're going to talk about two things which have no connection at all. One being UFOs and the other one being Ukraine. And they sound similar, Ukraine, UFO, but there is no connection at all between the two things.
We just want to say that for clear so that people don't try to hallucinate links like Ukraine being invaded by UFOs or similar. This did not happen.
There is no connection whatsoever.
Well, usually when we find each other to discuss in front of a camera, we inevitably end up talking about the fringe elements of reality and about speculations of what could be, which is the film and the realm in which we better move ourselves.
Yeah, and then we discover strange connections.
However, this time we will try against our nature to stay more focused on reality, since our reality is very much looking like dystopia right now in the world, and maybe deserves a little bit of close to serious attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, we could start with UFOs because they go back longer than the Ukraine, in the sense of the modern crisis in the Ukraine, because I have a book there about the Ukraine called Borderland, which is very good, and Ukraine has a long history, including the interesting fact that I believe in 1953, Khrushchev, as far as I know, illegally, as regards Russian law, detached the Crimea from Russia and gave it to Ukraine as a reward for the huge number of Ukrainians who fought in the Red Army during the Second World War, which makes the present so-called crisis where Putin is supposedly adventuring into the Ukraine and invading places and trying to seize land a little bit ironic, as the land of the Ukraine is occupied principally by Russians speaking Russian who were part of Russia until the illegal action by Khrushchev. Similarly old is the phrase flying saucers. Now, this first came to world prominence in 1947 after an American called Kenneth Arnold was flying his plane near Mount Rainier, Washington State, I think, and he reported seeing a number of objects which appeared to be moving like that, which he described as throwing saucers across water, moving at very high speed. He calculated 1,500 miles per hour, and that could be completely wrong, and which he said were so thin that he could hardly see them. Now, he never described them as resembling saucers in shape or appearance. And when he talked about skipping saucers over water, this seems quite peculiar to me, and also to various commentators upon what Arnold said, because nobody that I ever have encountered has ever thrown saucers across water to make them skip. You throw stones. You do not go to your grandmother's house beside the lake and for fun take out her saucers and start throwing them across the lake to see if they bounce. But interestingly, within days of Kenneth Arnold reporting things almost too thin to see, moving in a kind of chain in that kind of movement, the American press had taken up the word saucer and claimed that Kenneth Arnold had reported seeing flying saucers. No such thing had happened. But this is possibly one of the greatest examples of media misinformation insofar as it has affected the next 70 years of people's perceptions of objects seen in the sky and the whole mythology of alien spacecraft. He never described any sources. This was a concoction by the American media, which spread like wildfire. About 3 years later, he did use a saucer as a description of the shape, contrary to the way he had described it originally, which was not saucer-like and round. But by then he had been affected, obviously, by his own sudden world fame, and also by the avalanche of other information, imprinting the word saucer, saucer, saucer.
Yes, imprinting of new words is the specialty of actually the media. In the past we had mythologies raising in human culture in a kind of self-organizing system of people who orally narrate old stories, and mythomany added to the stories would create myths that would endure for thousands of years. But nowadays all this work, this myth building, has been taken over by media. Now media is quite an interesting concept, because every social society, or every human society, consists in a division of roles, of functions, so that society can work. So for example, a lawyer is not required to be able to manufacture bread unless he buys a machine who makes bread at home, which now we have as a gadget. But basically every function is done by specialized people, so that all the others are not bothered with the problem. And it works because we have our very complex society, and we can do things which are quite amazing actually, if we think that a few thousand years ago we were in the caves. But the part of this story which pertains the information and to tell to each others what happens, and this part which has been, let's say, the society has created media who does this, journalists who actually does this, has gone dramatically wrong, dramatically is turned bad recently, because we have this section of society, at least in the Western world, but I suspect that this is a worldwide problem to different extent, which doesn't basically work anymore, because we don't have any more reliable sources of information which complete this necessary function that a healthy human society needs. Mm-hmm. And in these days, this kind of malfunctioning can actually very easily lead to World War III.
Yes, as in the case of Ukraine, where we are receiving massive amounts of false information. We were looking at a map of American bombing, assassination, and other activities in the world over the past 50 years. And the black marks on the map are pretty widespread. Now, if you produce a similar map for Russia over the past 50 years, you will see bombing, I think, only in Afghanistan.
Yes, with a few tanks in Hungary and...
A few tanks in Hungary and in Czechoslovakia that was, though no bombing of those places. And the idea that Putin, I'm not a supporter of Putin in the slightest, he's a megalomaniac, and he was the head of the KGB, and you don't rise to the position he has risen to through being clean, innocent and lovely. But the objective evidence shows very little Russian aggression and very few Russian bombs over the last 50 years, compared with the map of the world being black with activities by the Americans of a military nature. And therefore the perception that's being pushed at us that Russia is engaged in some kind of military and territorial activity in Ukraine strikes me as absurd based upon the actual the collapsing Soviet Union allowed the Eastern Europe to go its own way, there was, I think, an agreement that NATO would not advance into the former East European countries. Now they are all members, and the West is pushing further and further closer to Russia. If Ukraine joins NATO, God help us, we would have NATO bases operated by somebody just beside the Russian border. And this is, if you think of it from the Russian point of view, rather intolerable.
Yes, now the Western media is actually depicting Putin as the new Hitler for basically no reason. While actually, if we want to find a parallel in history, we can very well go before the Second World War and see that Hitler was annexing countries around him,
yes.
with the same kind of pattern that we see now with NATO, because to put bases there and basically to take over the control of the military of the country is an annexation, you know. And so if we want to find a parallel with history, I don't think it's Russia actually who is behaving like that, like Hitler, but actually NATO. This you just have to watch on the map as, you know, the NATO bases advance and surround Russia. This is does not look very promising for world peace. Moreover, this is done with kind of surreal argumentations. For example, the basis, the very advanced radar system, which is currently built in Czech Republic and in Poland, and I think even in Romania, is allegedly, officially supposed to protect Europe from Iranian missiles. Now, whoever has a slight idea about how a world is, here we have a black world behind us, can verify that Poland and Czech Republic are not the best places where to put a missilistic system to protect about missilistic attack from Iran. Attack that Iran is not very likely to do anyway, because they don't have the possibility and they don't have the motive, and it looks like they don't even have the slightest intention actually. Now, when this thing was mentioned, you know, this reason of these missilistic installations to Putin during a talk show, there was the journalist who actually Putin spoke about this position, and the journalist said, but these are against Iran. Now, you usually would not see Putin laughing and being so friendly, because usually he has a kind of serious mask. But in that case, he just erupted in a sincere laugh. You could see that it was uncontrolled, because he could not really believe that somebody could seriously show to believe in such a nonsense. Now, this is all very, very scary, you know, if you not only are doing this kind of surroundings of a nuclear power, but actually you also pretend in such a blatant and absurd way that this is not true. This means that you prove that you have something to hide, that this is not defensive, but this is offensive. If it would be truly defensive, you would have no problem to explain that. But if it is offensive, then you would really pretend it is a defense against a very, very distant and other possible enemy.
Yeah, if you go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is the only time that Russian nuclear missiles have got anywhere near to America geographically, the world was genuinely on the brink of nuclear war then, because Kennedy wanted those out of Cuba, and the Russians backed it down. Is Putin at the moment threatening nuclear war as even a vague possibility, as this advance into the Ukraine of pro-Western fascists continues? No, it is the Ukrainian Minister of the Interior who starts mentioning nuclear weapons and declares that the Russians have used them as small nuclear weapons. Too small, which is transparent nonsense. When you look at photographs of the explosion, a factory in Britain, because of powder and dust, exploded very much more dramatically than any of those pictures of the alleged explosions of nuclear weapons. And
it's very absurd to think, that you can have a Ministry of Defense declaring to have been attacked by nuclear weapons and still be in your place. Yeah. Because if you are so incompetent not to be able to distinguish between a bomb and the nuclear weapons, you are very dangerous in your position. Moreover, there is another problem. It looks like the building which exploded, it was just a few days ago. It was allegedly munition or arm factory or something like that, which would be not really in the interest either of the Russians or of the separatists to destroy, because basically it can be very useful for them. So what you would do if you would be in their place is just to conquer it, and to keep it. Actually, most of the weapons which the separatists have, they have seized them from the army that Ukraine has sent to them. There has been a press conference by the separatists leader, which has never been shown in the West, of course, but it could be interesting to see also what the other has to say about a conflict. And they just say, well, send more troops, send more weapons, because we just seize them, we just capture them, and the more you send, the more we have. And it looks like they were quite sincere on that. And as a matter of fact, Ukraine now has stopped attacking the separatists because of the heavy losses that they effectively have suffered. Because it's, there is something that people overlook. There is always a very big psychological difference between people who are defending themselves and people who are aggressing others, because when you aggress others, you can deeply have the suspicion that something is not wrong, something is not right with what you're doing. And you can always have the idea of going back, of retreating. But once you are protecting your own territory and your families, which actually get bombed, and thousands of people have been killed, civilians, by bombs in there. And another thing which we don't really talk about that in Europe. So in Europe you have thousands of civilians killed by bombs, and we actually support these governments. So this is very, very scary, according to what the European Union has become.
Well, the difficulty is knowing whether there is a deliberate attempt by the media to lead astray the people in the West, or whether they are just stupid. The other day, for example, the Financial Times publishes a photograph labelled anti-Putin protesters, showing exactly the opposite.
Yes, this happened a lot of times. Also, during the Ossetian-Georgian War, I think it was Reuters who was showing pictures who actually turned out to be completely manufactured. And if I recall correctly, it was BBC or it was an American big network who actually showed footage of the alleged bombings of Georgia by the Russians, while actually the cameraman who shot the videos, they said, "What's going on? This is what I shot in Ossetia." It was exactly the contrary. So it looks like many times the information has been completely false in the Western media. And I think it was BBC who showed the protests in Libya, and actually there was some Indian flags. So this was some protests in India, exposed as...
Yeah, it's difficult to know if this is actual stupidity on the part of journalists if the calibre of journalists has gone down, 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 down in the past 20 years, or if they are actually following an agenda.
Probably both of the cases, because you would have the corrupted journalist and the stupid journalist. In Italy, we have very many of the second category, but at the top of the pyramid, you know, or in the newspapers, you probably have the corrupted one. Actually, just very recently, there's been an important book published in Germany by a German journalist who has worked for one of the major German newspaper. If I recall correctly, it is the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, I think so. And he just, I think the title is Verkaufte Journalisten or something like that. This means a journalist sold journalists, and he speaks about his own category. And as far as I heard, I didn't read the book yet, he's also, how you say, denouncing himself as one of the corrupted journalists who has been bribed directly by actually US to lie on the mainstream press. So one of the myths of let's say those kind of people who believe that they are so intelligent in the West that they know conspiracy theory, like they call them, can be true, is that if a conspiracy theory, I have to do like that because the concept is quite an interesting new invention. If a conspiracy theory would be right, you would have people speaking out because you cannot hide a conspiracy for a long time. But actually, the paradoxical, grotesque thing about that is that when somebody is speaking out, for example, you have now this journalist, he says, I am part of the conspiracy theory. I have been corrupted. My colleagues are corrupted. He makes a list of all the corrupted journalists, as far as I read, because I didn't read the book yet. Now, then you find probably the reaction being from total blindness, like close your eyes and put your head under the ground, to probably insinuations that the person is mentally insane, like in the Soviet Union, where the dissidents are put into a psychiatric hospital. Now, luckily, in the Western med society, you don't need to put them physically in the madhouse, but you put them symbolically. So once you make the character assassination, the person becomes a nut that simply has no value in what he says. Then you don't need to kill him properly, which I'm very happy about, because this means I'm still alive, you know, because I can be demolished, you know, intellectually and not.
The phrase conspiracy theory, in fact, goes back to 1909. I think an American journalist first used it then, and it was completely neutral for the next 20 or 30 years. It just meant that people thought that there was probably a conspiracy on the part of various people, and sometimes this has proved to be true. I mean, for example, in the case of Richard Nixon and Watergate, he was involved in a conspiracy. The Iran Contra scandal a little bit later was a conspiracy. But basically now, conspiracy theory has become a dirty word, which is used to do character assassination of people who are expressing deviant views.
Yes, it's a kind of soft version of the old habit of the church, to excommunicate the heretics, the people who does not fit in the mainstream conformistic view of reality. So they just lose their kind of citizenship in the reality. So what they say has basically no impact, no sense anymore. And it's very scary to see that we didn't advance very much from this period of the witch hunt. Now we have advanced in the sense that it's not necessary to burn the dissidents physically, you know, because you can just burn their image but anyway, it is quite depressing to see that we live in a kind of dystopia like that, a society in which we don't see wisdom and progress in approach of human beings to reality and truth advancing. So
yeah, the problem is that bad news is good news, and therefore the most exciting headlines are not the ones that say Putin acts reasonably over Ukraine and tries to get truce. It is the one that Putin may have used nuclear weapons, or Putin may have shot down a Malaysian plane.
And Putin may invade all Europe.
Yes.
That now there has been the revelation of Putin having told to Barroso that he could take Ukraine in 2 weeks, and Barroso told it to the press, and everyone said Putin is menacing to invade Ukraine. Now, what happened is that actually the presidency of Russia has said, well, it's not so very elegant from a diplomatic point of view to reveal discussions that has been done in confidentially. But Putin didn't really mean that, because what he said was taken out of context in a very, very inappropriate way. So please, if you don't retreat, we will release the whole conversation so that you can understand it better. And guess what? There has been a kind of a little under the line, between the lines retreatment, of course not by Barroso himself, but somebody there in the offices, and because basically the declaration was in a context in which he was underlining that he has no intention whatsoever to invade Ukraine.
Yes.
So now to transform something into its opposite, and by somebody in a high position like Barroso, it is really scaring, you know, because...
Well, this is very much 1984.
This is very much 1984. Everything turned into its opposite.
Yeah, yeah. With even bureaus, complete bureaus of people working at changing into the opposite. Whatever the news is or whatever the reality is.
Yeah, when the plane, the Malaysian plane, was shot down, the press in the West came out with unbelievable titles like Putin missiles.
Yes, yes.
Who will stop Putin? How can we stop Putin? I mean, it was completely delirious. Even if it would have been the separatists, it would have not been Putin. This was completely unfounded, unbelievable. However, this left a very strong impression in all the Western people that he had killed personally the people on this plane.
There is no advantage whatever to the separatists in doing that and getting the opprobrium and dislike of the world. The only reason it could be done is that the Ukrainians hope that the separatists will be blamed.
This is the only possible motive. Then you can have the mistake, of course. Somebody could have shot by mistake. But this is very unlikely, because a plane which flies at 10 kilometers height, it's very difficult to take it down by mistake, because it requires a very complex technology to be shut down.
Yeah.
Moreover, it would be interesting to ask the victims about who could be the culprit. And the Malaysian most important newspaper has come out with an article which, based on the evidence which is available, is blaming actually Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainian government, which looks like it could have shot the plane with bullets, because by analyzing the fuselage, the photo of the fuselage of the plane, you find damage which is not very consistent with the theory of a big rocket shot from the ground. And as a kind of indirect proof of that, there is the official result of the very long analysis by the Hollandish specialists, who actually came to the conclusion that something shot down the plane. So they don't dare to say that it was a rocket from below. They say objects coming from outside of the plane has shut it down. they're very, very unspecific. And this is highly suspicious because in nowadays, you know, when they are so precise in making a diagnosis of things, you know. So the fact that they don't want to tell you what happened, it's suspicious. And even more suspicious is the fact that there has been agreement between Ukraine, Holland, and I don't remember a third part, about the possibility to put kind of classify the information coming from the investigation. And this is again something that everybody should think about, that why would they ever want to not to disclose information once they have it, if this information is consistent with what they say now.
Yes, enormous amounts of work goes into investigating all plane crashes, and it is difficult to believe that in this case, where you have the wreckage, you cannot have a correct explanation for the wreckage. The other Malaysian plane, of course, has just vanished totally, and we don't know whether it crashed into the sea or whether it landed somewhere.
This is a gigantic mystery because it's like winning a lottery. I mean, a negative lottery. You have two planes who has two completely unique and very unlikely accident in a time frame of a few months.
Yes.
I don't know what this means, but it's very difficult not to think that there must be some kind of unthinkable relation between the two accidents. As I said, I cannot think at any, but I also don't like to believe in lotteries, you know, because...
You must allow some coincidence.
Some coincidence.
Because this is realistic. In fact, if you wrote a novel and put into it the number of authentic coincidences which there are in the world, you know, people meeting each other in a city which neither of them ever...
occasionally these things happen, yes.
Yeah, I know, and if you put those into a novel, they would not be plausible.
Yeah, that's the other problem. So sometimes they happen, but they are not very plausible. So
well, the population is, what, 7,000 million people?
Yes.
Constantly moving around now. The actual statistics of coincidences are that they must happen.
Yes, well, in my own life I experienced some completely mind-blowing coincidences which actually would have been completely unbelievable if so actually the coincidental part is still the coincidental hypothesis can still stand.
Yeah, well the only idea regarding the Malaysian Airlines coincidence is that somebody was trying to destroy the reputation and stock of Malaysian Airlines. I have no idea why or for what reason, and that cannot be an explanation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically bad news sells, and it will be manipulated to appear bad, or to appear whatever is the most exciting aspect of the news, as with the flying saucers. The description of what Kenneth Arnold saw was completely changed within a matter of days into a mythic wrong explanation, which then dominated the imagination of the world, and which you would never persuade anybody nowadays to go back to, because it would undermine a personal mythology which so many people have.
Now, it's quite interesting that for a long time people would see epiphanies of the Madonna or other saints appearing, while now the people see UFO appearing.
Yes.
And some people are sincerely convinced to have been abducted by the UFO. They are tested with truth machine, of truth, and they kind of
which are now no longer regarded as valid in courts of law for indicating correct answers.
Well, I think that if somebody is convinced of something, you know,
yeah, then they will.
And I don't think that somebody would be so stupid to fake this kind of stories. I think that they must be really delusional.
Yeah.
Because there has been a lot of there is a lot of literature about people having delusional experiences, and what if in the past delusions were how to say, in theme with the beliefs of the past.
Yes, yes.
Which means with the religious epiphanies. Now you have this kind of pagan new belief, you
popular
know?
beliefs as well. The whole history of fairies and the idea of being kidnapped by the fairies and going under the hill, spending one day there and emerging 10 years later. This kind of thing. It's structurally very similar to the mythology of UFOs. And I mean, I think what Kenneth Arnold saw was a meteorological phenomenon connected with interfaces between different streams in the atmosphere and reflections.
Yes,
Yeah,
the meteorological phenomena can
especially
very strange.
Especially when he talks about the things he saw being almost too thin for him to be able to see them. This suggests a reflection on a surface, or a chain of reflections that was just moving along the air currents. An unusual one, yes, but perfectly within the bounds of normal reality. And he certainly didn't say that he had seen anything other than a strange phenomenon of linked lights that were moving at high speed.
Now we are witnessing an increasing belief, the spreading of an increasing belief about the fact that the UFO are appearing here and there and checking us, visiting us and whatever. And I cannot fail to notice that actually this phenomenon curiously happens exactly in the same period in which we have the science fiction stories
which provide a kind of Weltanschauung, a worldview into which a traditional imagery of epiphanies fits.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And it would be very, very funny coincidence if the aliens would decide to visit us exactly in the century or in the decades in which, by pure coincidence, we have started to make films about them invading us, you know.
I mean, it would be astonishing.
It would be astonishing. Yeah. Why are not all these reports about alien epiphanies 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago? There is none. Those days you had saints appearing, you know. Now you have aliens everywhere, people spotting a kind of aliens which become more and more present the more cinematography is showing us to them, you know.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think this speaks by himself very well.
Yeah, well, back in 1947, when Kenneth Arnold reported seeing something strange, this was the height of the Cold War. The fear of that Russia would be attacking with missiles. Obviously the Americans would merely be defending themselves. The idea of total nuclear devastation could happen at any time. This produced, you know, a collective neurosis, which I was certainly aware of in the 50s and 60s. It was like some sort of nasty big toad, invisible toad, sitting on top of your head all the time. And the idea that aliens might have arrived from somewhere provided a kind of a possible source of salvation, that beings wiser than us might come and intervene.
Yes, and by the way, we had a kind of Doctor Strangelove scenario really happening in Russia, which was disclosed quite recently. There has been a case of a malfunctioning of computers in the Soviet Union, which led to the impression that they had been attacked. And the order of launching the retaliation was given.
Yes.
And there has been one soldier in the proper position who refused to obey to the order, and instead of becoming a hero because he basically saved the human civilization, once the mistake was recognized, he was kind of put aside in the sense that that had to stay secret. So basically, now the name is known. I don't remember it by heart, but it was shown in a documentary. Somebody interviewed him. But actually at that time it was quite, you are a hero, but you became a hero in a way that nobody must know, because it would be very, very bad if the information that something that could happen.
Yeah, whereas with Strategic Air Command, I heard it came out quite recently that for a period of 30 years the codes for launching missiles from their silos, where people would consult the code of the day and put it in, were just set at 0000 for and nobody ever changed them. So it was, in fact, there were no protections upon the launch.
Yeah, well. Maybe there are still 000.
Apparently.
Now there are 1111.
Oh yeah, they've changed them to something more sophisticated. And that was despite a presidential order some way back, that they must be randomized and foolproof, and nobody did anything.
And recently, since there is not so much more need to protect yourself from nuclear war, even though actually recently I think the danger has risen again. I've read that there are British government, American governments especially, they are starting to make plans how to react on alien invasion.
Yes. Well, this is probably partly bureaucracy, because if you have Federal Emergency Protection Agency, FEMA and things like that, bureaucracies tend to grow. They might not be effective at bringing disaster relief to, for example, New Orleans, but they're effective at growing as bureaucracies. And therefore you add more contingencies on, protection against earthquake, blah, 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 protection against tidal waves, what other protection might we need? Well, supposing there was an alien invasion, let's just add that on at the end of the list.
I wonder which kind of aliens they are thinking at. I mean, are they Hollywood aliens, or they are more Stanislav Lem kind of aliens, which can be hardly spotted?
Well, I think inevitably Hollywood aliens.
Yeah, probably.
Because that's the dominant imagery.
And I guess that actually at some point we may even see some representation of aliens invading us. It's simply too convenient not to happen.
Yes. Well, for example, we know so little about what really happened to the Twin Towers, and there are so many speculations about and even evidence of ways in which truth can be distorted, that carrying out a simulation of this kind of nature, an alien invasion simulation, could be done very plausibly.
In this case, we would have a scenario like in the Independence Day, where actually all the nations of the world unite to fight the external enemy.
A non-existent external enemy.
That non-existent, but this would be a minor detail.
Well, this would be a good idea, except under whose leadership would they unite?
I have no idea.
And who might disagree?
They could be the traitors, the people who work for the aliens, probably.
We have been infiltrated already.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think that we are going more and more towards kind of nightmares of representations, because in the whole history of mankind, you have politicians or people with power who actually would get their power by scaring their own people, offering protection. This is nothing new, it has always happened, and there is basically no war which started without a kind of false flag attack against yourself. Even Hitler pretended to be attacked by Poland, you know?
Yes, yes.
He was simply exposed because he lost. Otherwise, the history books would write that Poland attacked Germany.
The Germans dressed up in Polish uniforms. And,
But actually, in the past, you really needed real events to happen because so poor was the possibility to create just representation. But the question is, if you are able, because of technological means, to create only the representation of a tragedy, of an attack, do you really need to do the real one, sacrificing a lot of real people? Probably not.
Yes. Where do you go on to after having repelled? You have to repel the alien attack. You cannot allow it to succeed, and therefore have...
Well, you know, once you have an alien attack, you're virtually ready to be attacked any moment, because you don't know how many aliens are out there.
No.
And when the first wave has been repelled, you can always suspect that a second wave would come any moment. The cosmos is close to infinite, so there is endless possibilities for infinite aliens to attack you, or to menace to attack you, or to be just a few months from attacking you.
Except for the enormous amount of energy that would be required to make any interstellar journeys, even relatively short ones.
I think that this will be not discussed in the news.
No, it would not. They must be using an unknown method of propulsion. Well, in fact, NASA and the UK are apparently trying to develop the Alcubierre drive, which is ideally would warp space itself in a bubble, and it would not be a case of travelling faster than light. You would actually be moving space through space.
Yeah, I heard about
that. And it sounds sort of theoretically semi-plausible, and you might not need an enormous amount of energy to do this. I mean, you would not need to consume the complete planet Jupiter to provide energy, for example.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
But why aliens would invade in a defeatable way, I don't understand. Because to have the resources and energy to actually come in the first place suggests a superiority which could not easily be resisted.
I probably could possibly not resist it. If they would be able to reach us, it means the technology would be so advanced to ours, like our technology is advanced compared to the one of the monkeys.
Yeah.
So basically there would be no whatsoever even hope to resist to them, and we would probably be wiped out before we even realize what's going on.
Yeah, the reason for wiping us out is another...
Oh yeah, because there is no reason basically.
No. Extreme xenophobia might be one.
But
it doesn't sound plausible.
Yeah, it doesn't sound plausible. Basically, there is no reason to...
There's no reason to do that. And if you had a very superior, well, not all that much superior level of technology, there is nothing physical that you would want from our planet, because you could synthesize any elements that you wanted.
And then you cannot transport elements through huge distances in space. So it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the only reason for coming would be for information or to colonize if there are not actually all that many nearby habitable worlds, and it would be a very good idea to colonize Earth, just so all your eggs were not in one basket, so you could not be, your home planet could not be destroyed by an asteroid, for example.
Well, in this case, I suppose they should, like we would terraform Mars or another planet before being able to actually live there, because human beings cannot live in any other planet. I mean, we cannot even live in the North Pole.
No.
Because it's too cold. We cannot live in the desert because it's too warm. So the simple idea that a human being can live on another planet is a rare bullshit. You cannot find a planet with the same exact composition and the climatic conditions that we can fit. If this is not possible for us, it will be probably not possible for any other alien. So every other alien that would like to colonize the Earth, because it's the most likely place for them to settle as a kind of backup planet.
Yes.
They should alien form it. This means to radically change the climate and whatever, or maybe the chemical composition of the air.
Yes.
And assuming that they have the technology, which is not so easy, this would just mean total extermination for basically every living creature on Earth, including bacterians, because they would not be able to afford coexistence of different.
I think this would render the planet completely uninhabitable, and the seas, the land, it would not be worth.
It doesn't make any sense anyway. No way you look at it would make any sense. So if at some point aliens will invade us, we will know this is just a representation.
It's
a media representation or something.
It's extremely implausible.
I hope this happens, because this would become very entertaining.
Oh yes. The news would become even more interesting.
Yeah, because they are all false anyway, but at that point you would have good screenplayers eventually to be script, you know. For example, we have already some first experiments in this direction, completely fabricated tragedies which didn't happen anymore, like the so-called Sandy Hook massacre of last year, or 2 years ago. No, it was December, 2 years ago, something like that. It was a kind of one of the usual elementary school shooting where a little boy kills everybody, but it looks like it was a complete fabrication. It didn't happen at all. The victims have no name because they basically don't exist. Even the killer does not exist. It's very interesting. If anybody wants to make a research on YouTube, they find a kind of collective investigation over the internet exposing this ridiculous caricature of reality of tragedy, because you see the actors actually performing as desperate with a big smile, or you can see one of the fathers of the alleged victims laughing and joking with the friends before suddenly the camera comes and then he puts on the face of the sad parent. You know, all this doesn't. It looks like the funny thing about that. It looks like the exposure of the scam, of the media scam, was embedded in the scam, because these mistakes are too stupid to have been done by stupidity. It looks like they just wanted to create confusion and to check how many people would simply believe it. An absurdity which doesn't stand up in no case. It's even the victims, the children victims, that they have been singing at the Super Bowl later, which is again completely surreal. You have one of the victims posing with President Obama. Now, one of the victims. So you see the same picture, the victim presented as victim. It's the little Emily. It's a beautiful blonde girl, and then you see her with President Obama when he visits the family of the victim. You know, so it's like it's an intentional setup of a completely surreal and unbelievable representation of reality to see how strong is their grip on the minds of people. You know, because once there are studies actually on the fact that when you're facing confusing information, you stop thinking and you start to believe authority as a plan B for your construction of reality. So it looks like they intentionally make very bad work on that in order to create the necessary confusion so that the people even deeper believe instead of thinking. And looking at the reactions, it works. You cannot show this to anyone and having them changing idea. You can show them the photo of the victim as portrayed, and
maybe it is a twin sister.
Yeah, exactly. They start imagining the most unlikely scenarios, just not to have to think that something could be wrong with. It's like in a Philip K. Dick scenario where reality falls apart, but you don't want to recognize it.
Well, people do not like it when you start to pick away at a story, a news story, for example, and say, but actually this is implausible. This little bit is unrealistic. This little bit cannot have happened.
Yes, yes. It puts them in the condition that they have to deal with that huge problem instead of the little problems of your own life, which usually require all your attention. And if you have to deal with the whole construct of reality, of course, your practical everyday life is completely endangered.
The worst thing for people is to have their beliefs undermined. And that is even their interpretation of stories, of media stories.
There was one scene about this alleged Sandy Hook massacre where they interview somebody in front of the morgue, and then suddenly the media man who is conducting the interview, you see his nose disappearing. Now this usually happens when you have a mistake, or maybe an intentional mistake, in a chroma key setup. So this is typically when you do it in the studio and you just pretend to be there and you are not, you know. This means for some reason, you know, the chroma key is deleting,
deleted the end of his nose.
It was another funny element in the setup. But there are more, you know, like it looks like the whole if the last Batman film, the latest Batman film, there is the first shooting happening in the Batman film, which is they show in a map. They are showing in a map the place where it happens, and the place is called Sandy Hook again, but this happened before actually. And allegedly the person who made the map died in an accident later. And we don't even know if this is real, but this is what's happening, written in the newspaper. It's like...
how many Sandy Hooks are there in America?
That's
100? 2? I don't know.
There may be many, but anyway, it's quite funny. Well, the map, overlapping this map with the map of the actual Google map of Sandy Hook, you see that the road has exactly the same kind of
hook shape.
So in this case, the coincidence must be a little bigger. You know?
And the sandy area is not unusual.
I don't know if it's sandy, you know. Well, it could be. Well, there were a lot of other kind of strange implication, like one of the victims, the parents of the victims of Sandy Hook was basically looking very much like the lawyer of the previous mass shooter in the Batman movie, when somebody shot a lot of people. So it looks like everything is increasingly surreal when you look inside, like Chinese boxes with all the elements mixed together.
I have terrible difficulty recognizing actors. If they, remotely resemble each other, I'm quite capable of mistaking them. I mean, look at all those pictures of John Malkovich that we were looking at, where he can adopt 30 different personae, which are totally believable.
Oh yes, it's a little masterpiece.
Yeah, I mean, this should actually be the role of an actor, to be able to alter instead of just acting the same person. Like, for example,
The good actors.
Yeah, Tom Cruise. I always feel is acting Tom Cruise. And
Yes.
I just feel that.
He's quite credible as Tom Cruise.
Oh, yes, he's very plausible as Tom Cruise. Yeah. I need to go to the toilet.
Oh, yes. Should we take the camera there?
No.
No.